Hello darlings, this is Julie and welcome to my channel where we talk everything sewing. So today we will be making an oversized sweatshirt, but we will be adding a few techniques that will elevate this look to the next level. I will show you how to make a beautiful neckline, how to attach the sleeves, how to do embroidery with spray adhesives, how to make those beautiful side slits, and also how to professionally finish the hem. So if you're looking ways how you can improve your sewing quality, this is the video to watch. This video is also created in partnership with the friends of the channel, Orga Needles. Orga Needles is one of the leading brands in needle industry with over 100 years of expertise in needle making. I personally been sewing with Orga Needles for several years now, and I use them in all of my machines, the industrial straight that you see right here, the domestic sewing machine, the serger, and the embroidery machine. It is easy for me to recommend them because I use them, love them, and they're reliable and get the job done no matter what fabric or project I have on hand. Throughout the video, I will show you several different Orga needles and I will tell you which needle to use, when, and why. So, let's get started. To start our sweatshirt, let's first prepare the pattern. As a base, I'm using my Marie dress pattern, which I will link down in the description box. But you can also make the pattern from scratch using my easy tutorials, which I will also link in the description box. First, I'll shorten the pattern to the length I want, and I will add 2 cm seam allowance at the bottom. At the bottom sides, I am marking 10 cm for the slits opening, and I'll add 2 cm to the side of the slit for seam allowance. I repeat same adjustments on all sides of the sweatshirt. Before cutting out our pattern from fabric, we will do embroidery. Since embroidery is placed in various parts of the garment, it's best to do this step before the fabric is cut so that it's easier to reach all needed parts. I cut fabric rectangular, slightly bigger than my pattern piece, and mark pattern lines on the right side of the fabric so that I can position embroidery hoop easier. For embroidery, I will use backing, but the main fabric has a lot of stretch, which complicates the embroidery. To fix this, I'll use spray adhesive to stabilize the fabric. I spray the backing and then put the main fabric on top and press. Now the fabric is firm and not stretchy, which will make embroidery much easier. The fabric is now in the hoop and we can move to the embroidery machine. To do embroidery with spray adhesive, you want to use special needle with anti-glue properties. I'm using Orga Needles anti-glue needle, specially designed for embroidery when adhesive sprays are used. It also works with fleece and Velcro, and thanks to special coating, the adhesives won't stick to the needle and smooth embroidery process is ensured. Just like other embroidery needles, it has a light ballpoint and big eye, making it suitable for various embroidery threads. Once the needle is installed and the machine is threaded, we can start our embroidery. Depending on the size of the embroidery, it can take from a few minutes to several hours for the machine to complete embroidery design. I find that the longest part of the process is rethreading the machine, so the more colors you're using, the longer the embroidery will take. After about 4 hours of stitching, my embroidery is finished, and I feel like embroidery really elevated the design and gives it a unique touch. I washed the fabric to get the adhesives out, and now I'm gently pressing the embroidery and fabric to prepare it for cutting. Next, I cut the fabric and will start to assemble the sweatshirt, starting from the shoulders. To do that, I put front and back pieces right sides together. I pin shoulders together from the front part, and next I will move to the serger. On my serger, I'm using Orga Needles ELX705 chromium needles that are chromium finished for high performance. These needles also have a deep scarf, light ball point, and are double grooved for good yarn tension. One question I get asked is if serger needles are suitable to sew knit fabrics, and the answer is yes, they are. You can serge knit fabrics with serger needles without any worries. When serging shoulders, I'll add elastic tape to stabilize the shoulders and prevent them from stretching out. To add clear tape to the seam, you can slide the tape under the serger foot when serging, or check your serger foot. If it has a hole, then slide the tape through the hole and the machine will feed it to the seam. Here's how the tape looks installed. It's barely visible, but it will do its job and will prevent the shoulders from stretching out while maintaining the elasticity of the seam. After the shoulder seam is finished, press it. If you want the shoulder seam to be less visible from the front of the garment, press the seam allowance to the front of the garment. When pressing garment seams, make sure you're not overpressing, just gently but firmly press it and put steam to lock it in place. Next, it's time to put the collar in. Serge the collar sides together. If you want less bulk at the collar, press seam allowance to one side and from the middle to the other side. This way, when the collar is folded, you will have less bulk on seam connection. Next, fold the collar in half and press it again. Once the collar is pressed, pin it to place and serge around, gently stretching the collar so that it fits the neckline neatly. Make sure you are stretching only the collar, not the neckline. Since this is a circular seam, I like to finish it by driving the fabric away from the serger, leaving the thread tail, which I cut, and then using a big dull needle, I will pull back into the inside of the seam and completely hiding loose threads. Before moving to the sewing machine, press the seam that you just made, securing it to place and neatly finishing the neckline. Now we will attach the neckline protection tape, and this step will be performed on the sewing machine. Every time you're sewing stretch knit fabrics, you have to make sure that you're using a suitable jersey needle. Today I'm sewing with Organ Needles jersey needles that has rounded tip and ensures that the needle slips between the threads and does not cut them. That's why when sewing with the right needle, you get better seam results and the fabric is not stretched out or damaged. These needles come in several different sizes, and to choose the right one for your project, remember the rule: the thicker the fabric, the higher this needle size number. If you like to sew knits, I recommend always having a few boxes of jersey needles in different sizes and switching them before every project. I always have a box of jersey needles for my domestic sewing machine and my industrial sewing machine. For this step, you will need twill tape. You can match the color of the tape to your sweatshirt or use neutral color tape because it won't be visible from the outside of the garment. Take tape, fold the end of it and place it on the neckline back serger seam just below the shoulder. Be careful to place it only on the serger seam. Sew the tape to the serger seam. You should be sewing about 1 millimeter from the edge of the tape, and the stitch should be going right on the first seam of the serger. This is how the tape looks so far. Top stitch tape to the serger seam, sewing about 1 millimeter from the edge of the tape. Unfold shirt, and we will be attaching tape to the back of the sweatshirt, sewing 1 millimeter from the tape edge. This is where it gets really tricky, so stitch slow and make sure that the fabric is not folding anywhere. I will be honest, I had to redo the seam off camera because I didn't get it right the first time. This step might take some practice, but it will be so worth it. And here's how the seam looks from the inside and outside of the garment. Very clean, neat finish. Now we will attach the remaining serger seam to the bodice of the sweatshirt. From the seam, make one stitch at 90-degree angle and secure the stitch. Pull down the needle and rotate the fabric 90 degrees and continue to serge around neckline about 6 millimeters from the neckline seam so that you secure the serger seam in place. Once you went around the neckline, finish the seam exactly the same way as you started by pulling the needle, making a 90-degree angle stitch and securing it to place. Always remember, if you need to rotate the fabric mid-seam, always do it with the needle pulled down. This is how our neckline looks finished. The serger seam is completely secured and it will not be rolling over, and this is how it looks from the outside of the garment. Very beautiful. If you're liking the video so far, hit the like button. Now we will install the sleeves. This method is called open install because we will attach sleeves before sewing sides. Pin sleeves to the place and serge. At the ironing board, press the seam towards the bodice. Now we will attach serge or seam to the bodice. Mark where you want to attach it. I usually attach the top curve only. From seam connection, make a few stitches at 90 degrees angle and secure them. Pull down the needle, rotate fabric 90 degrees and continue to sew about 6 mm from the edge, securing serge or seam to place on the bodice part of the sweatshirt. Continue to sew until you're marking and finish the seam the same way you started it. This is how the attached seam looks like. The serge or seam won't be rolling over and it will give our sweatshirt very professional look. Now we will hem the sweatshirt. That's right, we will do it before the sides are stitched together. So I'll show you my favorite method for finishing hems in knit garments. First, serge the raw edge of the fabric. At the ironing board, press the seam flat so that you get a nice smooth surface. At the right side of the garment, mark seam allowance using chalk. Fold the seam allowance to the inside of the garment and gently press. Using base stitch, secure seam allowance to place. I like to do this stitch right through the middle of the serge or seam. It will make it easier for me to make the top stitching seam later. At the sewing machine, install twin needle. I'm sewing with Orga Needle's twin stretch needle, which is suitable for sewing knit fabrics. From the top of the garment, twin needle creates 2 rows of stitches, and from the inside you can see a zigzag stitch which gives seam its elasticity. This is why twin needle is a great substitute for coverlock machine. When choosing twin needle, select the size of the needle based on the thickness of the fabric and also pay attention to the distance between the needles. Orga Needle's twin needles come in 2 distances, from a more narrow and a wider one. For hemming, choose whichever is more beautiful for you. In my case, it's 4 mm distance. Also, quick side note, twin needle is also suitable for creating decorative stitches such as pin tucks and square pin tucks. Sew the hem with the twin needle. Once the seam is finished, remove base stitch and press. This is how finished hem looks like. Finish the second hem exactly the same way. Next we will do sides and slits. First, serge the slit parts. Now fold the sweatshirt in half and pin sides. Serge 3 cm until the slits start and finish seam with pulling threads back to the seam. At the sewing machine, sew from the end of the serge or seam to the beginning of the slits where you made the marking. Now fold the seam allowance of the slits to the inside of the garment and secure them with a base stitch. Using straight stitch, sew around the slit seam allowance. Make sure that when you're rotating the fabric, you have pulled the needle down, because otherwise it will be very difficult to create a nice continuous seam. Remove base stitches and this is how your slit will look like. Continue with the second slit. Pin cuff to place and serge around the cuff, slightly stretching it so that it fits to the sleeve bottom neatly. Now we will attach the serge or seam to the sleeve. Fold the cuff like this and sew around 6 mm from the edge of the seam allowance. Sew all around the cuff, and this is how the seam will look inside of the garment and the outside of the garment. This step will give a very nice professional touch to your garment because the seam won't be rolling around the cuff. After final pressing, my sweatshirt is done and here's how it looks like. We added small techniques, but they made a huge significant difference in the quality of the garment. And here are up close of the finished details: the slits, the sleeves, the neckline, the embroidery and the hem. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more sewing videos.